big, strong man. I love
Greetings and salutations. I'm here with my review of The Smashing Machine, a movie that's getting attention because it combines some words we do expect to see together, A24 and Benny Safdie, with some words we don't expect to see, which is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson starring in this motion picture. Johnson plays real-life wrestler turned MMA fighter Mark Kerr, who was an early participant in UFC. Though this movie focuses on 3 years in the late 90s where he was primarily fighting in Japan for a now defunct promotion called Pride. The Smashing Machine is being touted as the movie where Dwayne Johnson essentially returns to really acting for the first time in a while, and I think in that regard, it's a big success. Johnson is really good here, and I'm not that surprised by that because I think Dwayne Johnson has always been a good actor. And this goes back to his WWE days. The thing that made him a breakout there, the thing that made him a success that people wanted to work with him in Hollywood was because he was a very good performer, not just in the ring in matches, but the fact that when you got him on the mic, he was really funny, he was really charismatic, and I think that he was able to put that into a lot of his early action roles. And I think he was really smart in his early career where he was intermixing the straightforward action movies with things like Southland Tales or Be Cool or even Pain and Gain, which was an unusual movie for both director Michael Bay and for Johnson. These were interesting roles, these were nuanced roles, and I think that he got to show different flavors in these roles. But unfortunately, in recent years, there's been a lot of sameness to both the movies that The Rock is picking and his performances in them. And, there's a reason there's a joke that how many movies does he play a guy wearing like a khaki shirt and just the characters all start to blend together. I think a huge example of that is Hobbs from Fast and Furious, who is very distinct in Fast Five. And by Hobbs and Shaw, just kind of seems like another generic Dwayne Johnson hero. And so there was something really disappointing about the path that he'd taken and how he just wasn't mixing it up anymore. And it's really exciting to see him in this role and how he does fully immerse himself. And I love the early scenes where you get to know Mark and you kind of see the gentle giant persona that he does exude. The fact that he will talk to you about what he does and his understanding of it and what he feels to fight, and the fact that he knows it's a strange thing to sort of pummel someone for a living, but that he sees it as something more important, the sort of transcendent feel he gets from it, the way he interacts with people, and that kindness and the gentleness, and that there is a lot of contradiction there, not just in the fact that what he does for a living, but the fact that at home he does have a lot of problems. He has a drug addiction that he is not doing such a great job of hiding as time goes on. And I think that Johnson really embodies that dichotomy, and you can believe that this is the way that this guy exists, that he does juggle so many different things, that he does have this sweetness to him, and that then he can kind of go into the ring and just be the smashing machine of the title. And then he has to show the vulnerabilities of this character, and there are scenes where he has to break down crying, and I completely bought into it. I didn't think, oh, well, there's The Rock play acting at crying. I thought, no, that's Mark the character who is really losing it in this scene. I felt like Dwayne Johnson really did connect to this character and the aspirations of Mark and how they would parallel his own aspirations in life. And then, showing all the different sides of him, including the sort of crappy, sleazy side of him as a drug addict who is trying to trick people into giving him more drugs or hide drugs from people. I felt like Johnson, you could see, was completely invested in the character and completely invested in giving a performance for Benny Safdie that was worthy of him and of this movie. And it is so funny, right, that this is an A24 Dwayne Johnson movie, but I think on those terms, it completely works. I didn't come out of the movie 100% satisfied in the story it was telling, and I think that is because of the hyper-specific approach it takes. And this is something we're seeing a lot more with biopics. I think that they're trying to get away from the cliche of biopics and when you chart someone's entire life and career, the expected beats it's going to follow. So you're seeing movies that are more hyper focused. And I think you saw this with A Complete Unknown and how it approached Bob Dylan. And you're going to see it with the Springsteen movie this year, where they're like, we're just going to focus on 1 year or a few years and what happened in that time frame rather than show you everything from childhood to later adult. And I get that idea that it can be strong to do that. It can actually help you make a stronger film. But this was a movie where I felt like I wanted more, and I felt it needed more to actually make it more dramatically satisfying. Mark's path is not one that a Hollywood studio would usually give you. What happened in his life and his career. I'm not going to say it just in case you don't know, but it's obviously out there. It is real life history. So if you're aware of that at all, it's like, okay, this is interesting that we're going to follow this, and how will they sort of chart this in a script? But I feel like where the movie lets off, it just doesn't give you enough. And I think that's especially obvious with the on-screen text at the end. It does that thing that happens in a lot of movies based on true stories where they tell you where people ended up. And there's information you get in that text that I wanted to see. And a big part of that was what the text tells you about where the relationship goes between Mark and Dawn, played here by Emily Blunt, and places we don't see it go on screen that I think would be important and would add more to what we do see in the film. These two actors are really good together. It actually really stands out that Emily Blunt is one of the few actresses that I felt Dwayne Johnson had had sort of a romantic chemistry with when they did Jungle Cruise together. Not a great movie, but they had a really good on-screen chemistry. They really played off each other well. They became real life friends, and I think you could feel that in the movie because sometimes when The Rock is given a romantic interest on screen, it just doesn't really sell. But in that movie, I believe that him and Emily Blunt had this banter, had this little bit of flirtation, and the movie didn't quite go into a romance with the two of them. So it was really interesting to see them actually play a romantic couple here, and I think they continue to play off each other well. The fact that she would be sort of this tough lady with a very tough, physically imposing person, that she just kind of fully accepts that, what he is like, what his life is like. But then, of course, there are some issues between them as well. And I think there's some really interesting beats about his addiction and his battles with his addiction and how that makes her feel. And that maybe her response to it isn't the expected response, or maybe even not the greatest response, but it can be an honest human response. I really like those moments between them. Emily Blunt, obviously a fantastic actress, and I think that the two of them just have some really strong moments here together. But I wanted to dig a little deeper here on her character. Some pretty shocking things happen with her character at some points, and I didn't think we'd quite built them up. We didn't know quite enough about her, so it does kind of feel like it's out of left field, which is fine if you can follow that up and maybe have her talk about it more, but you don't really. And I guess maybe I feel like this movie is missing one or two big monologues for these characters. And I know monologues can sometimes be overwrought, but sometimes they can be, a perfect little bit of insight that I think we just needed to get a little bit more here. The observational approach that Safdie takes works really well. And especially, I think it works in the first maybe two-thirds of the movie. As we're seeing Mark day to day, we're seeing the truth about what he's like behind closed doors. We're seeing those contradictions within him. But in the third act, I did, and especially the way the movie leaves off or doesn't leave off, I felt like I wanted more. I wanted to know Mark more. I wanted to know Dawn more in a way that I think the movie doesn't quite get at. And I think it really easily could have if maybe we just had a couple extra scenes, a little more connective tissue, and frankly, a little more at the end to show some of those things that they tell us instead. But I love those two central performances. And I also really liked Ryan Bader, who plays Mark Kerr's best friend, Mark Coleman, a fellow MMA fighter. I know that Ryan Bader is a real life fighter. I guess that based on how he looks, even though I don't follow MMA at all. But he was really good. He had a really naturalistic feel to him, too. We have to believe in these two guys, has longtime friends that Coleman has been helping Mark Kerr train, but there is now a possibility looming that they might have to fight each other because there's this tournament coming in Japan they're both part of. And I really liked Bader and how he felt like another sort of really sweet guy, a guy who has this crazy line of work, but that you just sort of really could believe in this long time friendship between these two guys. And I thought that he gets a lot of really nice moments on his own as well that I appreciated. So I didn't quite love the Smashing Machine in a way that I wanted to, but I still quite admired it. And I still thought it certainly did its job of reminding you that Dwayne Johnson is capable of more than he's been doing in the last few years. And I hope that this does put him in a new direction to really maybe shake things up more. Look, he should still do the big action movies. He's a perfect person to do them, but I think he can also mix in the more interesting, quirky roles as well. There is a lot of different types of movies out there that I'd like to see him sort of mix it up in. It is funny in this movie. The suspension of disbelief that you have to do is that he is playing a guy in the late 90s who basically Mark Kerr and Dwayne Johnson are the same age in real life. I think Dwayne Johnson's like 3 years younger. So you're watching Dwayne Johnson play a character that is decades younger than he's actually is in real life. It's okay. The movie kind of gets away with it. You just can kind of ignore that fact. And there is something interesting about the fact that this is all happening in real life. Mark's story is happening at the same time that Dwayne Johnson is becoming a sensation in pro wrestling. And that is it's at that same era. The rise of UFC is happening while the WWE is when they're the Attitude Era, as they call it. And it is funny to think about the parallel lives that these two men are living, something I'm sure Dwayne Johnson had in his mind as well, even taking on this film, taking on this role. This certainly feels like a story that Benny Safdie is invested in and a man he's very invested in. But yeah, the last few minutes, not just the on screen text, but even the way that the movie concludes, which in has some footage of the real life Mark Kerr, but it just felt like he didn't quite know how to wrap up the story. But I honestly think the answer might have been going a little longer and just letting us see a little more of Mark's story. Because what you read on screen, and then once you start Googling, like I did, about what happened after, I think that that could have made for a more satisfying movie overall. And yet, I still did appreciate the movie that we got. So those are my thoughts on The Smashing Machine, which is hitting theaters this weekend. You look, I tried to avoid the pun as long as I could, but it's hitting theaters. It's just right there in front of me. I'm going to grab it. If you could like, that'd be great. If you could subscribe, that would also be great. That's it for now. Take care.